There's a gas station on the edge of just about every town you've ever driven through. Cracked asphalt, puddles of old rainwater. And right there, splitting through the concrete like it has somewhere important to be, a dandelion. Bright yellow, defiant. You've stepped on it 1,000 times. Your grandparents made tea from it. Civil War medics packed wound herbs pulled from ditches just like that one. And now, NIH-funded research confirms what those people already knew: the chemistry is real. Liver-supportive compounds, documented diuretic action, anti-inflammatory markers that show up in peer-reviewed journals. The most powerful plants on this planet aren't behind pharmacy counters, they're under your feet. And you've been mowing them down every Saturday. One plant on this list is the direct ancestor of aspirin. Another was carried by Roman legions as battlefield wound care. This is what they didn't teach you. You think you know what a weed is, something unwanted, something that grows where it shouldn't, something you pull, poison, or ignore. But here's the thing: the line between weed and medicine was drawn by people who had something to sell you. And the plants didn't get the memo. They kept growing. They kept doing what they've done for thousands of years, producing compounds so effective that entire pharmaceutical empires were built by isolating what these species already contained. So let's start where it starts for most people, with the most dismissed, most underestimated, most aggressively removed plant in the modern world. You already know its name, you just don't know what it can do. Dandelion the whole body reset. It grows in every temperate zone on the planet. You'll find it in sidewalk cracks in Chicago, sheep pastures in Wales, rooftop gardens in Tokyo, and that one spot in your driveway you keep meaning to spray. The bright yellow flower head is unmistakable. The leaves are jagged and slightly bitter if you chew one. The stem snaps clean and bleeds white latex that stains your fingers. And for at least 1,000 years, traditional healers across Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and medieval European herbalism have used every part of this plant root, leaf, and flower for liver support, digestive health, and fluid balance. In traditional Chinese medicine, dandelion root was documented as a cooling herb for liver heat. European herbalists brewed it as a spring tonic to support kidney function. And modern research has caught up. Studies have identified taraxesterol, a compound in dandelion root with documented hepatoprotective effects in animal models. Its diuretic action has been confirmed in human pilot studies, and unlike synthetic diuretics, dandelion supplies potassium rather than depleting it. One clinical review noted that dandelion extracts showed promising anti-inflammatory and antioxidant activity. People brew the roasted root as a coffee substitute. They eat the young leaves in salads across France and Italy, where it's not a weed, it's a delicacy called pissenlit. And why was it forgotten here? Because you can't patent something that grows in every lawn on the continent. It's too common to be taken seriously, too free to be profitable, and too effective to be conveniently ignored forever. Think of dandelion as a full-spectrum maintenance crew that shows up uninvited and does the job anyway. You didn't hire it, you didn't ask for it, but it's been working longer than anything in your medicine cabinet. Now stay with me, because the next one might be growing within 10 feet of where you're sitting right now. Plantain, and not the banana relative, Plantago major, the trailside first aid kit. This is one of the most common plants on Earth, and one of the most ignored. You've seen it. Low rosette of broad ribbed leaves. Tough, almost rubbery texture. It loves compacted soil. Footpaths, driveways, the edges of baseball diamonds, anywhere people walk. In fact, some Native American nations called it white man's footprint because it seemed to follow European settlers wherever they traveled, growing in their trails and wagon ruts. But indigenous peoples across North America already had their own deep relationship with it. Poultices of chewed plantain leaves were applied directly to insect stings, cuts, and skin irritations, a practice documented across multiple tribal traditions. Go back further. In Anglo-Saxon England, plantain was one of the sacred 9 herbs listed in the Lacnunga, a 10th century medical text. They called it Waybroad and considered it powerful enough to stand alongside mugwort and chamomile in ritual healing. And modern science? It found aucubin. That's the compound, a naturally occurring iridoid glycoside with verified antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. Peer-reviewed wound care studies have shown that plantain extracts accelerate healing and reduce bacterial load on skin injuries. If you crush a fresh leaf between your fingers, it smells green and vegetal, slightly earthy. The texture is stringy and fibrous, like nature designed it to be a bandage. And that's essentially what people have used it as, for centuries, a living wound dressing you pull from the ground. Got a bee sting on a hike? A blister from new boots? A scratch that's irritated and red? Traditional users chew a leaf to break the cell walls, then press it directly to the skin. It's not magic. It's documented phytochemistry meeting practical need. And the reason it got buried? Same reason as dandelion. It's everywhere. It's free. And it doesn't come in a box with a barcode. Plantain is the emergency room that grows in your yard. You just never got the orientation tour. A young woman's hand reaching down to gently touch a plantain rosette in a garden path. Here's where we start going deeper. Cleavers the lymph mover, Galium aperine. If you've ever walked through a meadow and come out with tiny green balls stuck to your socks and sleeves, you've met cleavers. It's that gangly, scrambling plant with whorls of narrow leaves and a stem covered in microscopic hooks, nature's original Velcro. It clings to everything, which is how it earned its name. Pull it off your jacket and you'll notice it's light, almost weightless, with a fresh, grassy smell and a texture like fine sandpaper. European folk herbalists have used cleavers as a spring lymphatic tonic for centuries. The idea was simple. After a long winter of heavy food and low activity, the body's fluid systems needed movement. Cleaver's tea was brewed to support the lymphatic system, help the body process waste, and promote gentle detoxification through increased urination. Now, the clinical evidence here is more traditional than modern. Preliminary research has explored cleaver's diuretic and anti-inflammatory properties, but large-scale clinical trials are still limited. This is one where the tradition runs deeper than the science for now. But the tradition is consistent across multiple European herbal systems, from Gerard's herbal in the 16th century to modern British herbalism. Herbalists today still recommend it as a gentle lymph support tea, particularly for sluggish systems and mild fluid retention. It's typically gathered fresh in spring, steeped briefly, and drunk warm. Some people juice it raw and mix it with apple juice to cut the grassy taste. And here's the thing about cleavers, it grows everywhere. Hedgerows, garden edges, the shady side of fences, that patch of green mess behind the garage. It's one of the most abundant wild plants in temperate climates, and most people only know it as the annoying thing that sticks to their dog. Think of it as a gentle internal rinse cycle, not dramatic, not instant, but persistent and traditionally reliable. The evidence is still catching up to the history, but the history is long and consistent. Almost nobody talks about this next one, and that's a shame. Chickweed the skin soother, Stellaria media. It's small, delicate, and completely unassuming. You'll find it carpeting shady garden beds, creeping along the base of walls, and filling in the gaps between stepping stones. The leaves are tiny, oval, and bright green. The stems are thin and slightly hairy on one side, a strange little feature that helps botanists identify it. Crush it between your fingers, and it feels succulent, cool, and mildly juicy. The taste, if you try it, is fresh and mild, like baby spinach with a hint of corn silk. People today still use chickweed salves for eczema flare-ups, dry skin patches, and minor rashes, particularly in the British herbalism tradition. Is it going to replace a dermatologist? No. But as a gentle, accessible topical support for irritated skin, it has centuries of documented use and a biochemical profile that explains why it works. And modern ethnobotanical reviews have identified why. Chickweed contains saponin's natural plant compounds that have documented anti-itch and anti-inflammatory properties. It also carries flavonoids and vitamin C. making it a surprisingly nutrient-dense wild green that traditional communities across Europe ate in salads and soups. One ethnobotanical review described chickweed preparations as demonstrating measurable anti-pruritic effects, fancy language for "it stops the itch." Medieval European herbalists documented chickweed extensively for skin complaints, itching, rashes, minor burns, and irritated patches. It was mashed into poultices and applied directly or infused into oils for topical use. The logic was cooling and soothing, drawing heat and irritation out of inflamed skin. Why forgotten? Because it's small, soft, and quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just grows in the shade and waits for someone to remember what it does. Chickweed is the plant equivalent of a cool cloth on a sunburn, simple, effective, and completely overlooked. Now, here's one that might genuinely make you angry. Purslane the omega weed, Portulaca oleracea. This succulent little ground hugger is one of the most pulled, poisoned, and discarded plants in American gardens. It sprawls across warm soil with thick, paddle-shaped leaves that feel smooth and slightly waxy between your fingers. Snap a stem, and it's juicy crisp and mildly tangy, like a lemony cucumber. It grows in garden beds, along sidewalks, in the cracks of driveways, basically anywhere the sun hits bare soil. And here's the shock. Purslane has the highest omega-3 fatty acid content of any leafy green plant on the planet. That's not folklore, that's USDA confirmed nutritional data. Specifically, it's rich in alpha-linolenic acid, a plant-based omega-3 that plays a role in cardiovascular and inflammatory health. It also carries significant levels of vitamins A, C, and E, along with magnesium, potassium, and beta-carotene. Chinese medicine has used purslane for over 2,000 years, documented in classical texts for cooling heat and resolving toxins. Ancient Greek physicians, including references in texts attributed to the Hippocratic tradition, noted its use for inflammation and digestive complaints. It was a common food in medicine across the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and South Asia for millennia. And today? Today, it's sold at specialty health food stores for $12 a pound, while people next door are ripping it out of their flower beds and throwing it in the compost. One agricultural review called purslane a nutritional powerhouse with global food security potential. You can eat it raw in salads, sauté it lightly, or blend it into smoothies. The texture holds up under heat, and the mild tartness pairs well with almost anything. So, why is nobody talking about this? Because it looks like a weed. It acts like a weed. It grows like a weed, and the supplement industry would rather sell you omega-3 capsules at $40 a bottle than tell you the same compound is growing free in your backyard. Purslane is nature's multivitamin disguised as a nuisance. And that right there, that pattern, is what this whole list is about. What you've been taught to remove is often what you should have been eating. That was just the warm-up. Those 5 plants are growing within walking distance of almost everyone watching this. Common, dismissed, documented. And we're only getting started. Now we're moving into the ones that changed the course of wars, survived epidemics, and have research backing that would surprise most physicians. Keep going, on, because this is where it gets serious. Yarrow the battlefield surgeon, Achillea millefolium, named, literally, after the Greek hero Achilles, who legend says used it to treat his soldiers' wounds during the Trojan War. That's mythology, sure, but the real history is just as dramatic. Yarrow has been documented as a wound care plant across European, Chinese, and Native American traditions for thousands of years. Soldiers in the Civil War carried it. Scottish Highlanders packed it into cuts. Native American nations across the Great Plains used it for pain, fever, and bleeding. And the plant itself is distinctive feathery, finely divided leaves that feel soft and almost fern-like to the touch. The flower heads are flat clusters of tiny white or pale pink blossoms. Crush the leaves and you get a sharp, camphoraceous scent, green and medicinal, like the forest floor meets a first aid kit. The chemistry behind yarrow's wound care reputation centers on compounds called achillean and flavonoids, which have demonstrated hemostatic properties, meaning they help slow bleeding. Modern wound care studies have confirmed anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial effects in yarrow extracts. One systematic review described yarrow as having promising wound healing potential, supported by both in vitro and preclinical evidence. Traditional preparation is straightforward fresh leaves crushed and applied directly to a clean wound as a poultice, or dried and brewed into a strong tea used as a wound wash. It's also been used internally as a fever reducer and digestive bitter across European herbalism. People still forage it today for home first aid kits. Why is it forgotten? Because modern wound care moved to sterile gauze and antibiotic ointments, which are great. But if you're miles from a pharmacy and you step on something sharp, yarrow growing at the trailside is not a myth. It's a documented, compound-rich option that humans relied on for millennia. It's the original field medic, no packaging, no expiration date, just chemistry doing what chemistry does. This next one might be the most underappreciated respiratory plant on the continent. Mullein the lung cleaner, Verbascum thapsus. You've seen it even if you don't know the name. It's that tall, dramatic stalk with a thick cone of yellow flowers that shoots up from a base of huge, soft, flannel-textured leaves. Grab a leaf and it feels like a lamb's ear, thick, fuzzy, velvety. Old-timers called those leaves nature's toilet paper on the trail, which tells you everything about the texture. The whole plant has a faint honey-like smell when it blooms. It thrives in dry, disturbed soils, roadsides, railroad embankments, gravel lots, construction zones. And its respiratory reputation stretches back centuries across Appalachian folk medicine, European herbalism, and parts of Ayurveda. Mullein leaf tea was the standard home remedy for persistent coughs, bronchial congestion, and chest tightness in communities across the American South, the British Isles, and rural Germany. The mechanism? Mullein contains saponins, which act as natural expectorants, helping to loosen mucus. It also produces mucilage, a slippery, gel-like substance that coats and soothes irritated mucous membranes in the throat and airways. Think of it as a two-action system, loosening what's stuck and calming what's inflamed. Modern research has validated these traditional uses. Studies have confirmed mullein's expectorant and demulcent properties, and one pharmacological review noted its anti-inflammatory and antiviral activity against certain respiratory pathogens. It's typically prepared as a tea from dried leaves strained carefully through cloth to remove the fine hairs, which can be irritating if swallowed. Some people infuse mullein flowers in olive oil for earache drops, another traditional use with preliminary research support. And why did this fade from common knowledge? Because cough syrup came in a bottle. Because convenience beat tradition. Because it's hard to charge premium prices for something that grows in a ditch. Mullein is the original cough drop before cough drops existed, a gentle, effective respiratory support that your lungs recognize even if your brain forgot. If the last few entries surprised you, keep going. We're building toward the ones that will completely change how you see your neighborhood. Red clover, the blood purifier, Trifolium pratense, those soft, globe-shaped pink-purple flower heads you see dotting meadows, roadsides, and unmowed fields. That's red clover. It's one of the most recognizable wildflowers in temperate regions, and one of the most traditionally valued plants in European and North American herbalism. The flower heads are sweet and faintly honey-scented. Pick one and pull apart the tiny florets. They taste mildly sweet, with a hint of fresh hay. The leaves are the classic three-lobed clover shape, often with a pale chevron marking. In traditional European herbalism, red clover was classified as an alterative, a plant believed to gradually support the body's natural cleansing processes, particularly related to skin health and lymphatic flow. It was brewed as a tea and recommended for chronic skin conditions, respiratory irritation, and as a general spring tonic. Some traditional herbalists called it a blood cleanser, a term that lacks clinical precision but reflects a long tradition of using it for systemic support. The modern research on red clover focuses heavily on isoflavones, plant-derived compounds that mimic estrogen at low levels. This has made red clover a subject of significant clinical interest for menopause-related symptoms. Multiple clinical trials have studied red clover isoflavone supplements for hot flashes, and while results are mixed, several reviews report modest benefits for some women. One meta-analysis found a statistically significant reduction in hot flash frequency compared to placebo. It's important to note that the isoflavone content means red clover isn't appropriate for everyone. People with hormone-sensitive conditions should consult a healthcare provider before use. That's a real qualification, not a throwaway line. But the broader point stands: a common meadow flower contains bioactive compounds powerful enough to warrant dozens of clinical investigations. People brew the dried flower heads into a mild, pleasant tea. Some add it to infusions with nettle and oat straw for a traditional, nourishing blend. And the reason it's overlooked? Because it's everywhere, because it's pretty, and because nobody suspects the soft pink flower in the field of being pharmacologically interesting. Red clover is the quiet researcher of the plant world, unassuming in appearance, surprisingly potent under the surface. Now, if you're starting to realize how much has been hiding in plain sight, good. That's the point. And if this is reshaping how you look at the world outside your window, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because this knowledge should be common, and it's not. Not yet. Here's one almost everyone has heard of, but almost nobody truly understands. Elderberry, the epidemic survivor, Sambucus nigra. The dark purple-black berries that hang in heavy clusters from a shrubby tree found across Europe, North America, and parts of Asia. The flowers are creamy white, flat-topped, and smell like sweet honey with a musky edge. And the ripe berries stain your fingers dark violet and taste tart, earthy, and faintly sweet when cooked. Raw elderberries contain compounds that can cause nausea. They must be cooked or processed before use, and that's a safety point worth respecting. But once processed, elderberry has one of the most compelling research profiles of any wild medicinal plant. Traditional European herbalism used elderberry syrup and elderflower tea for centuries as immune support during cold and flu season. Every rural grandmother in England, Germany, and Scandinavia had an elderberry recipe. It was so embedded in folk medicine that the elder tree itself carried spiritual significance. You asked permission before cutting it in some traditions. The modern validation is striking. A 1995 study during a flu outbreak in Panama found that elderberry extract significantly reduced flu duration and symptom severity compared to placebo. Subsequent research identified anthocyanins, the pigments that give elderberries their dark color, as potent antioxidants with demonstrated antiviral properties in laboratory settings. A 2019 meta-analysis concluded that elderberry supplementation substantially reduced upper respiratory symptoms. One review described the evidence as supportive of elderberry's traditional use for immune health. Today, elderberry syrup is a multi-million-dollar supplement category. Bottles sell for $20 to $30, and the elder trees? They grow wild in hedgerows, along streams, and at forest edges across most of the northern hemisphere. The stuff people pay premium prices for grows free on the margins of their own neighborhoods. Elderberry is the epidemic survivor that became a billion-dollar industry, proof that the line between folk remedy and validated supplement is thinner than anyone wants to admit. This next one is where things get intense. Stinging nettle, the iron fortress. Urtica dioica. Almost everyone has a nettle story. You brushed past it as a kid, and your skin erupted in burning, itching welts that lasted an hour. That sting comes from formic acid and histamine delivered through tiny hollow needles on the leaves and stems, the plant's defense system, and one of the most memorable sensory experiences in the wild. But here's the twist. That same plant that stung you is one of the most nutrient-dense and medicinally documented wild plants in the world. The leaves, once cooked or dried, which neutralizes the sting completely, are packed with iron, calcium, magnesium, and vitamins A and C. They taste like rich, earthy spinach with a mineral depth that cultivated greens can't match. The texture when cooked is silky and dense. Roman soldiers stationed in cold northern climates reportedly whipped their own legs with nettle stalks to stimulate blood flow and warmth, a practice called urtication that was documented in traditional European medicine for joint stiffness and arthritic pain for centuries. Traditional herbalists across Europe brewed nettle as an iron-rich tonic for anemia, fatigue, and recovery. In German phytomedicine, nettle root has been clinically studied for supporting urinary health in men with benign prostatic hyperplasia. Multiple clinical trials have shown modest benefits, and nettle leaf extracts have demonstrated anti-inflammatory effects in laboratory and preclinical studies. One pharmacological review noted that nettle contains compounds that inhibit inflammatory pathways similar to some nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory mechanisms. People use nettle as a cooked green, sautéed with garlic, blended into soups, or brewed into a dark, mineral-rich tea that traditional herbalists call one of the most nourishing daily infusions available. You can find nettles along riverbanks, at forest edges, in moist, shady areas, and in disturbed soil near old buildings. They're abundant, aggressive growers that most people avoid, which is exactly the pattern by now. Painful, common, avoided, and absolutely loaded with documented value. Stinging nettle is the bodyguard that looks hostile, but is secretly carrying everything you need. We're past the halfway mark now, and the escalation is about to pick up. But first, one that looks like it belongs in a dinosaur documentary. Horsetail, the bone knitter, Equisetum arvense. This is one of the oldest plant lineages on the planet. Horsetails have been growing for over 300 million years, predating flowering plants, predating dinosaurs. What survives today is a smaller version of ancient giants that once formed entire forests. You'll find it along stream banks, wet meadows, railroad tracks, and damp roadsides. It looks like a miniature green bottle brush, jointed, segmented, with whorls of thin needle-like branches. It has no leaves in the traditional sense and no flowers. The texture is gritty and slightly rough, like fine sandpaper. That gritty texture is the key. Horsetail is one of the highest natural sources of silica, a mineral compound essential for connective tissue formation, including bones, cartilage, hair, skin, and nails. Traditional European herbalism used horsetail preparations for centuries to support bone healing and strengthen brittle nails and hair. The plant was so valued for its silica content that it was also used to polish metal and clean pots, hence old names like scouring rush. Modern research has validated silica's role in bone health. Studies have shown that bioavailable silica supports collagen synthesis, which is the structural framework of bone. One clinical study found that silicon supplementation improved bone mineral density markers, and horsetail extract has been identified as one of the richest botanical sources of bioavailable silicon. It's typically brewed as a tea from dried stems, though the taste is mild and somewhat grassy, more functional than flavorful. Some traditional herbalists combine it with nettle for a mineral-dense bone support infusion. A qualification worth noting: horsetail contains thiaminase, an enzyme that can break down vitamin B1, so long-term high-dose use requires caution. But in moderate traditional use, it has a safety profile consistent with centuries of application. Horsetail is the slow builder, not flashy, not fast-acting, but working at the structural level. Think of it as rebar for your connective tissue, delivered by a plant older than most mountain ranges. Now, this next one is going to be controversial, and that's exactly why it belongs here. St. John's wort, the mood architect, Hypericum perforatum. You'll find it blooming along roadsides and in dry meadows from June through August. Bright yellow, star-shaped flowers in clusters atop wiry stems. Hold a flower petal up to the light, and you'll see tiny translucent dots. Those are the oil glands that contain hypericin, the compound that made this plant famous. Crush the flower buds between your fingers, and they stain red. A vivid, almost shocking pigment that traditional herbalists took as a signature for blood and wound healing. The plant smells faintly resinous and herbal, like dried summer grass with a medicinal edge. Traditional European herbalism used St. John's wort for nerve pain, wound healing, and what old texts called melancholia, a broad term covering depressive states, anxiety, and emotional distress. It was one of the most prescribed herbs in medieval European medicine. And then modern science caught up, dramatically. German clinical trials in the 1990s and 2000s compared standardized St. John's wort extract to prescription SSRIs for mild to moderate depression. The results shocked the psychiatric establishment. Multiple studies found it comparable in efficacy to standard antidepressants for mild to moderate cases with fewer reported side effects. A major Cochrane review confirmed that St. John's wort extracts were superior to placebo and similar to standard antidepressants for this indication. The mechanism involves hypericin and hyperforin, compounds that appear to modulate serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine reuptake, the same neurotransmitter systems targeted by pharmaceutical antidepressants. Now, here's the critical qualification, and this one matters. St. John's wort has significant drug interactions. It affects liver enzymes that metabolize many pharmaceuticals, including birth control pills, blood thinners, HIV medications, and other antidepressants. It also increases photosensitivity. This is not a plant to use casually or without professional guidance if you're on any medications. That's not a hedge, it's a safety fact. But the core point is staggering. A roadside wildflower available for free contains compounds that rival prescription antidepressants in clinical trials. That's not folklore. That's peer-reviewed, Cochrane-reviewed, replicated science. And it grows in ditches. St. John's wort is the plant that forced modern psychiatry to take a weed seriously, and the fact that it can't be patented is a large part of why most people still don't know. We're closing Act 2 with one that deserves a standing ovation. Calendula, the skin rebuilder. Calendula officinalis. Those bright orange and golden marigold-type flowers you see in cottage gardens, herb gardens, and increasingly in the wild where garden escapees have naturalized. Not the common French marigold. This is pot marigold, calendula, and it has a pedigree that puts most skincare brands to shame. The petals are vivid sunset orange, silky to the touch, and slightly resinous. Crush them, and they leave a faint golden yellow stain with a subtle peppery, honey-like scent. During World War I, calendula was used as a wound dressing on the battlefield. Field medics applied calendula poultices and tinctures to open wounds, burns, and surgical incisions when conventional supplies ran short. This wasn't improvisation. It was based on centuries of documented use across European herbalism for skin healing, burns, and inflammatory skin conditions. The active compounds include triterpenoids, especially faradiol, which have demonstrated anti-inflammatory and wound-healing properties in multiple modern studies. Clinical trials on calendula cream for radiation dermatitis in cancer patients found significant reductions in skin toxicity. One randomized trial published in a major oncology journal reported that calendula was more effective than a standard pharmaceutical preparation for preventing radiation-induced skin damage. That's a clinical trial in a cancer care setting where a flower extract outperformed the conventional option. Calendula is prepared as an infused oil, a salve, or a tincture for topical use. People apply it to minor burns, scrapes, dry cracked skin, and irritated patches. It's gentle enough for sensitive skin and has a long safety profile in topical application. Why overlooked? Because it looks like a garden flower, because it's associated with cottages and grandmothers, not clinical medicine. Because nobody suspects the orange flower in the herb garden of carrying compounds that outperform pharmaceutical skin preparations in randomized trials. Calendula is the skin rebuilder that never left. It just got buried under 100 brands that synthesized what it already contained. If you're realizing how much knowledge has been hiding in the most ordinary places, you're exactly where you should be right now. Because everything up to this point has been building toward what comes next. We're crossing into legendary territory now. The plants with the most dramatic histories and the most stunning modern conformations. These are the ones that changed medical history, won Nobel Prizes, and grew in ditches the entire time. Let's start with the one that built an empire, white willow bark, the aspirin ancestor, Salix alba. If you've ever taken an aspirin, you've already used this plant, you just didn't know it. Willow trees grow along riverbanks, streams, and wet areas across Europe, Asia, and North America. The bark is gray and furrowed on older trees, and the inner bark, the part that matters, is smooth, pale, and slightly bitter. Peel a strip, and you'll notice a clean, astringent taste with a faint wintergreen quality. For over 3,000 years, humans have chewed willow bark for pain and fever. Ancient Sumerian tablets reference it. Hippocrates prescribed it in the 4th century BCE. Native American nations used willow bark tea for headache and fever independently of any European influence. Egyptian medical papyri mention it. This is not one culture's folk remedy. This is a global, multicultural, multimillennial convergence on the same plant for the same purpose. And the compound responsible? Salicin. When you ingest salicin, your body converts it to salicylic acid, the active precursor that a German chemist named Felix Hoffmann modified in 1897 to create acetylsalicylic acid. You know it as aspirin. Bayer built one of the largest pharmaceutical brands in history on a compound derived from a tree that grows wild along creeks. Let that settle for a moment. The best-selling pain reliever in human history is a modified version of what a willow tree makes for free. Modern research has confirmed salicin's analgesic and anti-inflammatory effects. Clinical trials on willow bark extract for lower back pain found efficacy comparable to standard anti-inflammatory doses, with one study published in a rheumatology journal reporting significant pain reduction. The evidence is strongest for musculoskeletal pain and headache. Exactly the traditional uses documented for thousands of years. People brew willow bark tea or take standardized extracts. It's gentler on the stomach than aspirin for some users, though it's slower acting. And the qualification matters. People allergic to aspirin should avoid willow bark, and it carries similar blood-thinning considerations. But the core revelation is undeniable. Modern pharmacy didn't invent pain relief. It refined what a riverbank tree had been doing since before written language. White willow bark is the original aspirin, and the tree is still standing, still producing salicin, still growing for free at the water's edge, while you pay for the synthetic version at the drugstore. That's not conspiracy. That's just history. If that last one stunned you, this one is going to hit even harder. Valerian, the sleep commander. Valeriana officinalis. This plant looks unassuming. Clusters of small pink-white flowers on tall stems, growing in damp meadows and woodland edges across Europe and parts of Asia. The leaves are feathery and compound, but the real action is underground, in the root, and you'll know it the moment you smell it. Valerian root has one of the most distinctive odors in the plant kingdom: earthy, pungent, musky, and vaguely reminiscent of old socks. It's not pleasant. Ancient healers didn't care. They cared that it worked. Roman physicians, including Galen, prescribed valerian for insomnia. During World War II, British civilians in London used valerian tinctures to calm their nerves during the Blitz. It was included in official wartime herbal preparations when pharmaceutical sedatives were scarce. The plant's documented history as a sleep and anxiety support stretches back over 2,000 years across Greek, Roman, and medieval European medicine. Modern research has identified the mechanism. Valerian root contains valerianic acid and isovaleric acid, compounds that interact with GABA receptors in the brain, the same neurotransmitter system targeted by benzodiazepines and modern sleep medications. Multiple clinical trials have investigated valerian for sleep quality, and while results vary, several systematic reviews report modest improvements in subjective sleep quality, particularly with consistent use over 2 to 4 weeks. One meta-analysis noted that valerian appeared to improve sleep quality without the morning grogginess associated with pharmaceutical sleep aids. It's typically taken as a tincture, a capsule of dried root, or a strong tea. though the taste and smell are challenging enough that most people prefer capsules. And the reason it sits in the supplement aisle rather than the pharmacy aisle? Same reason as everything else on this list. A wild root can't be patented. A 2,000-year-old remedy can't be branded as a breakthrough. And a plant that modulates the same brain chemistry as prescription sleep drugs doesn't fit neatly into a system that needs a patent number to take something seriously. Valerian is the sleep commander that smells terrible and works quietly, the opposite of everything modern marketing values, and exactly what traditional medicine preserved. Stay with me, we're deep in the legendary tier now. Echinacea, the immune alarm system, Echinacea purpurea, Echinacea angustifolia. Those tall, striking purple coneflowers with the spiky, dome-shaped center and drooping petals you see in prairies, wildflower gardens, and roadsides across North America. Snap a stem, and you feel a slightly rough, fibrous texture. Chew a piece of the root, and your tongue goes tingly and numb. That's the alkylamides, the bioactive compounds that make Echinacea unique. The Great Plains nations, including the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Pawnee, used Echinacea root as one of their most important medicines. It was documented as a treatment for toothache, sore throat, snakebite, and pain, and was considered a primary remedy for infections and immune challenges. This wasn't casual folk use, it was central to indigenous pharmacopoeias across the American prairie. European researchers discovered Echinacea in the late 19th century through contact with Native American herbalism, and by the 20th century, Germany had made it one of the most studied herbal medicines in the world. The research picture is nuanced. Meta-analyses on Echinacea for the common cold show modest but consistent benefits, primarily a reduction in cold duration and symptom severity when taken at the onset of symptoms. One major meta-analysis published in Lancet Infectious Diseases found a significant reduction in cold incidence and duration. The compounds responsible, alkylamides, polysaccharides, and saccharic acid, appear to modulate immune cell activity, essentially functioning as an alarm system that increases immune alertness without overstimulating it. Not every study agrees, and Echinacea research has been complicated by variations in species, plant parts, and preparation methods across different trials. The evidence is stronger for some preparations than others. That's an honest qualification. But the traditional use spans centuries. The modern research base includes dozens of clinical trials, and the biological mechanisms are increasingly well understood. People take Echinacea as a tincture, tea, or capsule at the first sign of a cold. Some chew fresh root for throat support. And the plant itself grows easily, prolifically, and beautifully. Echinacea is the immune alarm system hiding in a wildflower garden, proof that indigenous knowledge systems identified what clinical science took another century to validate. Now this is the one that won a Nobel Prize. Wormwood, specifically Artemisia annua, the fever breaker. The Artemisia genus is vast, found across every continent, from the sagebrush deserts of the American West to the herb gardens of China to the roadsides of Eastern Europe. Artemisia annua, sweet wormwood, is a tall, feathery, aromatic annual with leaves that smell sharp, green, and slightly camphoraceous. Rub them between your fingers and the scent stays with you. The plant grows in disturbed soils, field margins, and waste ground. And what happened with this plant is one of the greatest medical stories of the 20th century. In 1972, during the Vietnam War, Chinese scientist Tu Youyou was tasked with finding a malaria treatment for soldiers dying of drug-resistant strains. She turned to the Gaihong medical text from the 4th century, a traditional Chinese pharmacopoeia that described steeping sweet wormwood in cold water to treat intermittent fevers. Tu Youyou followed the ancient method, extracted the active compound at low temperature to preserve its structure, and isolated artemisinin, a sesquiterpene lactone that proved devastatingly effective against the malaria parasite. Her discovery has saved millions of lives. Artemisinin-based combination therapies are now the WHO's standard treatment for malaria worldwide. 2UU won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2015 for a discovery that came directly from reading a 1600-year-old herbal text. Let that sink in. A 4th century Chinese herbalist's instructions, followed precisely, led to a Nobel Prize, a modern pharmaceutical class, and millions of lives saved. The traditional use was the hypothesis, modern extraction was the method, and the plant grew wild the entire time. Now, artemisinin extraction requires specific processing, and wormwood species contain other compounds, including thujone in some varieties, that require caution. This is not a backyard remedy for malaria, but the principle is what matters here. Ancestral herbalists documented what worked. Modern science confirmed why, and the plant didn't change. Our willingness to listen did. Wormwood is the fever breaker that rewrote medical history, and the proof that traditional pharmacopoeias aren't folklore, they're data. One more in the legendary tier before we close, and this one carries the most fascinating contradiction on the list. Comfrey, the bone mender, Symphytum officinale. It grows in moist ditches, along riverbanks, and in old-fashioned herb gardens. The leaves are large, rough, and bristly, covered in coarse hairs that feel scratchy to the touch. The plant grows vigorously, forming dense clumps with drooping purple, pink, or white, bell-shaped flowers. Dig up the root and you'll find it's slimy and mucilaginous, thick, wet, and slightly earthy in smell. Medieval healers called this plant knitbone. That name wasn't metaphorical. They used comfrey poultices on fractures, sprains, and broken bones with documented consistency across European herbalism for centuries. The belief was that comfrey could accelerate bone and tissue repair, knitting broken things back together. The active compound that validates this tradition is allantoin, a molecule that stimulates cell proliferation and tissue regeneration. Modern clinical trials have studied topical comfrey preparations for acute musculoskeletal injuries, and the results are remarkable. Multiple randomized controlled trials have shown that comfrey-based topical creams significantly reduce pain, swelling, and healing time for sprains, strains, and bruises. One study published in a phytomedicine journal found that comfrey cream was as effective as a standard anti-inflammatory gel for ankle sprains. Now here's the critical qualification, and this one isn't optional. Comfrey contains pyrrolizidine alkaloids, compounds that are hepatotoxic when taken internally. Internal consumption of comfrey has been linked to liver damage, and oral use is restricted or banned in many countries. This is a topical-only plant in modern responsible use, and that distinction matters enormously. Traditional herbalists who used comfrey internally were working before this toxicity was understood. Modern herbalists restrict it to external application, and that's the evidence-based position. But for topical use, sprains, bruises, muscle strains, minor fractures supported by proper medical care, comfrey's clinical profile is genuinely impressive. The bone mender earned its name through centuries of applied use and modern validation. It's just that using it wisely means knowing its limits. And that's the kind of knowledge this whole list is built on. Not blind faith, not fear, but informed respect. Comfrey is the bone mender that teaches you that power always comes with responsibility. We've been building to this. Everything from the dandelion in that gas station parking lot to the Nobel Prize discovery of artemisinin has been leading here, not to the most dramatic plant, but to the most important lesson. The final two aren't just plants, they're a philosophy. Chamomile, the quiet powerhouse, Metricaria chamomilla. You know this one. You've probably had the tea 100 times. Little daisy-like flowers with white petals and a puffy golden center. The scent is instantly recognizable, warm, apple-sweet, calming, like a hug translated into chemistry. The flowers are small and delicate, slightly sticky when fresh, and they grow in meadows, field edges, garden beds, and disturbed soils across Europe and North America. And most people think chamomile is gentle. That's true, but gentle is not the same as weak. Chamomile is the most consumed herbal tea on the planet. Over 1 million cups per day, worldwide. And its active compound, apigenin, is one of the most studied flavonoids in modern pharmacology. Apigenin binds to benzodiazepine receptors in the brain, the same receptors targeted by drugs like Valium. Clinical trials have investigated chamomile extract for generalized anxiety disorder, and multiple studies have found significant reductions in anxiety scores compared to placebo. One randomized trial found that chamomile extract produced meaningful anxiolytic effects comparable to low-dose pharmaceutical interventions. Beyond anxiety, chamomile has demonstrated anti-inflammatory, antispasmodic, and gastroprotective effects. Traditional herbalism across European, Middle Eastern, and Egyptian medicine used chamomile for digestive upset, menstrual cramps, skin irritation, and sleep support. It's been documented in medical use since ancient Egypt, where it was dedicated to the sun god Ra for its healing associations. People drink the tea, apply cooled chamomile compresses to irritated skin, use chamomile-infused oil for massage, and take standardized extract capsules for anxiety support. It's accessible, affordable, and backed by both ancient tradition and modern clinical trials. And why is it underestimated? Because it's everywhere. Because it's associated with bedtime, not with medicine. Because nobody fears chamomile. And that's its greatest trick, being so familiar, so gentle, so common that nobody suspects it's pharmacologically significant. Chamomile is proof that the most powerful things are sometimes the quietest. And that brings us to the last one. Not the flashiest, not the most famous, but maybe the most fitting end to this list. Mugwort, the dreamer's herb. Artemisia vulgaris. It grows everywhere. Roadsides, vacant lots, railroad tracks, alleyways, fence lines. Anywhere neglected, disturbed, or forgotten, mugwort shows up. Tall, silver green, with deeply lobed leaves that are dark on top and silvery white underneath with a soft, downy texture. Rub a leaf and you release a sharp sage-like aroma with bitter, warm undertones. It's a scent that lingers on your fingertips and stirs something old. And mugwort's cultural reach is staggering. In traditional Chinese medicine, it's the plant behind moxibustion, the burning of mugwort near acupuncture points, a practice documented for over 2,000 years and still used clinically today. European herbalists brewed mugwort as a bitter digestive tonic and a menstrual support herb across medieval and Renaissance traditions. Native American nations used Artemisia species in ceremony, smudging, and as practical medicine for colds and digestive complaints. The Anglo-Saxons listed mugwort first among the 9 herbs, the most important healing plants in their tradition. The bioactive compound most discussed is thujone, a volatile terpene found in small amounts, along with flavonoids, sesquiterpene lactones, and bitter principles that stimulate digestive secretions. Modern research on mugwort is primarily traditional and preclinical. Clinical trials are limited compared to plants like chamomile or willow bark. Studies have confirmed anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and antimicrobial properties in laboratory settings. Its traditional reputation for vivid dreaming, people place dried mugwort under their pillow or drink a mild tea before bed, is widespread but not clinically proven. That's an honest distinction. But mugwort matters at the end of this list not because of any single compound. It matters because it represents everything we've been talking about. It grows where nothing else is valued. It's dismissed as a weed. It has thousands of years of cross-cultural documented use. And it bridges the gap between the oldest traditional practices and the edge of modern research. Mugwort is the connector, the plant that links a 4th century Chinese healing text, an Anglo-Saxon charm, a Native American ceremony, and a modern phytochemistry lab. It's been here the whole time, growing in the cracks, waiting for someone to pay attention. And that's it. 20 plants, growing in ditches and vacant lots, and sidewalk cracks and roadsides and meadows and riverbanks. You've walked past every single one of them. You've mowed them, pulled them, sprayed them, or stepped over them without a second thought. And the whole time, they were carrying compounds documented across thousands of years of human medicine validated by clinical trials, studied in peer-reviewed journals, and used by soldiers, herbalists, grandmothers, and Nobel laureates. This isn't about abandoning modern medicine, it's about understanding where it came from. About recognizing that the line between weed and medicine was drawn by economics, not by chemistry. And about seeing, really seeing, what's already growing around you. Remember that gas station? That crack in the asphalt? That dandelion pushing through like it had somewhere to be? Next time you see it, you'll know what you're looking at. The pharmacy was never closed. You just didn't know the language. Now you do.